Welcome to Perimenopausal Athletes and Beyond Masterclass series, bringing together experts in mindset, nutrition, training, and recovery. And today we have an expert in the nutrition field and specifically in sports nutrition. So welcome, Kylee, to the Masterclass series.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am super excited, as you already know, because we are getting into whole food nutrition for sports, before, during, after, things we need to think about. But let me first introduce you a little bit so people know who they're talking to, because it is really exciting that we have you. So let me tell you, Kylee, it comes to us as an endurance sports dietitian. And she really is working with everybody, including the elite athletes and the everyday athletes. So that's most of all of us here. She really also comes into the space of wanting to separate what is the fads that we have to how do we make all these nutritional components come together and work in our life. She has she's founded and is the owner of Fly Nutrition, and really focusing on the endurance sports of runners, triathletes, skiers, and looking at how do we make sure we're fueling for our performance and nourishing our bodies. She's a freelance writer, Trail Runner magazine. You can find her work in there, women's running, outside online, super fun. Welcome. And did I miss anything? Is there anything that you want me to share in addition to that?
No, just that I'm also an endurance athlete. So I kind of, I've been involved in the space since I was 10 years old as a runner. So it's always nice to be able to work with the same population that I kind of grew up in as well. And so I do a lot of trail running now, but grew up a road runner and ran in college and everything. So I love working with the population that I get to work with every day.
Yeah, I think we share that love. I mean, we are pretty much the luckiest people in the world with the job that we have.
I agree. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. So where we're going to go, and we're going to just get started right away. I should say I'm Tennille. I am the host of this masterclass series and the coach of Element Sports Coaching. But really where I want to start and get into things is, let's talk about what we mean by whole food. And why do we like that term? Even using whole food is important to you. And can you just give us this, like a real grounding of this? Because I think it's actually quite important.
Yeah. So we were kind of chatting about this a little bit before we got on the official recording, but this is something, in the endurance space, I think the language that we use is really important in any space, really. There's so much diet culture messaging that we get in the media. And it wasn't until actually I was chatting with one of my former eating disorder athletes about the different language that we use in conversation and how we talk to people, that I realized that oftentimes when we're talking about fueling during activity, we'll talk about using real food. And we were talking about how maybe real food makes other certain things seem like bad options, maybe like your sports nutrition products, et cetera. And, what defines an actual, quote, real food. So wanting to kind of shift the language to more of whole foods. So a whole food, is something maybe that is more substantial and not, not specifically formulated for, by a sports nutrition company. Again, we're still kind of in a way making up the definition of a whole food, because I wouldn't say that it's like a whole food is unprocessed, because a whole food could be a fruit that's blended up, which would actually be processed in a way, or it could be a cookie. So again, the line there is hard to kind of define, but at the same time, when we're using language for fueling during activity, I like to use the word whole food versus real food, because I think that there is less of a negative connotation there when we're comparing options for fueling.
Yeah. And one of that negative connotation that we're talking about is making moral judgment. And like you alluded to all just in your comments earlier, is saying, does it make it so sport confectionery is bad? Well, we want to get away from that, because what we're doing and what the focus of today's interview with you is specifically is how do we fuel our body for all types? And when we're talking from a short duration activity all the way to an ultra endurance activity, we need different strategies. And so we want to just create all of it. I would add to the idea of a whole food is something that can go bad.
Yeah.
I think that is, at the end of the day, a whole food is it's living. And that, I shouldn't even say this from practice. I know that sport confectionery can last a really long time without going bad. And so it is not that that's bad. It's actually created with the intent that it can last and last within the duration of whatever elements it's also being thrown into. Whereas a whole food will flourish, it will grow things. So that's another way to think about it. So what we want to do is come into, when do we want to think about using whole food, and when is it that we might want to think about using sport products, and how do we start finding that balance, or where do we start being curious about this and how to do it?
Yeah, and I think this can get a little bit complex, because I think, everyone's going to have a different GI system. So overarching theme is everyone needs to figure out what works best for them and not compare maybe to what their friend is doing. You can get ideas from other people, but remembering that you're a unique person. However, keeping in mind that when we're doing, I would say anything less than like half marathon distance, we're going to typically be going at a higher intensity. And the priority there is going to be, quick energy production. And so when we want a quick energy production, carbohydrates are going to be broken down and they're the most efficient source of energy production. So our carbohydrate sources and our quick carbohydrate sources are going to be our best option for those sorts of endeavors. Yeah. Now, and that's kind of where my cutoff typically is. And then once we start getting past that marathon distance, then we can start considering, like, do we add in more whole food options? Even consideration of utilizing like, a food blend option, like a Muir or Spring Energy, or homemade food blend options might be more considered for longer distance, maybe a little bit lower intensity activity.
Right. So can you give us just a chance, like, because there's a lot of varying abilities in terms of a half marathon to a marathon distance. So is there a time frame that you're thinking specifically that you can share?
Yeah, sorry, I should have kind of specified that. I would probably say, anywhere upwards of 3.5 to 4 hours, then maybe start considering more like whole food options.
Yeah.
But even then, it still is hard to say, because everyone's going to be going at a different percentage of their VO2 max. And so even if someone is going a quote slower pace, that still might be hard for them. So it's kind of, I would say it's a little bit hard to define in a sense.
Yeah.
Because of that overall like effort that you're putting out.
So the main point that you're trying to create there is that when you have an intensity, and we can say an intensity could be a perceived effort of really anything 5 to 6 and above. Yes. Right. Would be something in which you really want to think about, more faster carbohydrates, which may then lead you to have access to, there might be some whole food options, so we can talk about those, but might lead you to be more of a sport confectionery or easier intakes, like more sugarish. So let's stay there for a second. So, and maybe let's break it up as well. So before you're about to take on one of these intensity efforts, let's look at, and then we'll separate it out to the endurance piece. So we'll take one and then look at the other. So we're now talking to anybody who is doing a 2.5, 3 hour effort with intensity. And we're looking at pre. What would you say would be a good whole food option, or how do you support your athletes to think about what they would need to eat just ahead of time so they can reduce any of their gastrointestinal distress that they might have?
Yeah, so if you are someone that does tend to experience a lot of GI distress, then you might even have to go as far as like doing liquid options and kind of going with a smoothie or something that's easier to get down. It starts to get really complex because again, like if you're, I work with athletes sometimes that can't tolerate fructose at all. And so if that's an issue, then you can't even really use like fruit in a smoothie. So it's like, finding the best option for you. This is where, again, it can be really important to work through this. If we want to give, typically I like to give calorie guidelines. So usually for an effort up to 3 hours, I would say 300 to 500 calories in a window of 1 to 3 hours beforehand is a good target. Now, if you tend to experience more GI distress, then you're going to want to give yourself more time to digest.
Right.
And then if you're doing something that's longer than maybe 3-4 hours, then I'd say even you want to consider going up in your calorie consumption to like 500 to 800 calories. And a lot of this depends on like body frame size, how long you're going to be going in your event, etc. So if you just kind of give a good rule of thumb there, you can figure out, okay, what are kind of my calorie targets? What kind of, stomach do I have? If it's really sensitive, I might need to take this in even longer. Outside of like an hour is probably not a good option for me. I might want to go out to 3 hours. And then really making sure that the composition of what you choose is going to work for you. So we know that fat takes longer to break down in the GI system, so does protein. However, for some people, having a little bit of fat and protein can help slow down the release of carbohydrate into the bloodstream and can prevent a blood sugar spike and drop, which is called like rebound hypoglycemia. And so maybe inclusion, I usually say like 8 to 10 grams of protein might be a good target. Some people can handle a little more fat, but I usually say up to 10 grams. And then with your carbohydrate choices, that's where we were kind of talking about, like, it really depends on specifically what you can handle. And as I mentioned, I have worked with particularly some female athletes that can't handle any fructose like the day before their event and then the morning of or during, because they may have a slight fructose intolerance. So being aware of the type of carbohydrate that you're consuming, as well as, does this have a lot of fiber or not? Because if it, pre-exercise is not the time to be focusing on like, I need to get in all my whole grains and my like high fiber options,
right.
Unless you really want to risk potentially running to the bathroom.
Yeah. Can I just get you to clarify just for us? So fructose, it's really common. Well, I wouldn't say it's really common, but as you mentioned, commonly known among female athletes that fructose, and it actually increases the chance that you may find that it's not working for you anymore, increases as we age as well. That seems to be a frequency rate that
Mhm.
is highlighted. And so where would we know something has, like if we were looking at a sports product, how do we know it's fructose, or where, so it's all in fruit? Because there's a lot of oses. There's fructose and sucrose and glucose and galactose and lactose. So can you just help us really make sure that we know where, what are things that we really need to be aware of that has, like dates, for example, maybe is really high in fructose, or what sort of things should we be looking for?
The hard part is that, um, I don't have a full list memorized. I would honestly suggest looking for a list. There are
Yeah.
some great lists online that you can get of like high to low fructose foods.
Right.
Because the thing is a lot of things contain both glucose and fructose.
Right.
So like honey, for instance, would, or maple syrup would, and sucrose also contains some fructose as part of the molecule itself. So for me to give like an extensive list is difficult. Um,
Yeah.
so my suggestion might be to actually, look up what would be a list of fructose containing foods. Now, you are right in saying like fruit would contain fructose. And I think sometimes that's actually forgotten by people. They think of fructose as being high fructose corn syrup. Like that's
Right.
where a lot of people's minds go, is like high fructose corn syrup. But then there's all of these things like sweeteners, et cetera, that contain fructose, and that, they still contain fructose, even though it's not high fructose corn syrup. So keeping in mind that there's a lot of things that contain fructose. And so you've got to kind of be, I guess, a detective of a nutrition label to be able to kind of figure that out.
And it might also be like, as you're mentioning and continuing to remind us, it also might be really individual in the amount of fructose that you can actually tolerate. So you may be a person that can tolerate some fructose, but you just don't tolerate a whole whack of it. So maybe some of it is like, I know a lot of my athletes love the maple syrup, pinch of salt, lemon combo. And maybe that is something that you can deal with. But if you added, a whole date bar, that's not going to work for you.
Well, that's the thing, is like, we do know that the amount of fructose transporters in the GI system it's going to be individualized as well. So you can't just compare to your friend and say, oh, well, they're eating all of these spring energy gels and I'll be able to do that same amount. That's not how it works, so everyone needs to be their own detective in figuring this kind of stuff out. Right. And which is why it's a good idea. I always recommend giving yourself at least 2 to 3 months before your target event to start practicing with different things. Yeah. Because you can get a better sense of what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. And a particular OCR athlete that I'm working with right now, they've experienced a ton of GI distress during races in the last year or two, like some gas, bloating, diarrhea, etc. And I said, hey, let's try like either eliminating fructose or doing low fructose the day before, during, and then pre-race, and just did an event and had no issues. So like it can be a solution for people, I think, that are, I don't want to say that fructose is bad, but it can be a solution for people that might be struggling to figure out, why am I having all of these issues? But yet I feel like I've dialed in my hydration, electrolytes, and my calorie, carbohydrate, etc. intake. Right. So yeah, I guess I don't want people to think the extreme of like fructose is bad, because actually we do know, if you can handle some fructose, you might be able to take in a little bit higher intake of carbohydrate during exercise and fuel yourself a little bit more with carbohydrate during exercise if you do a mix of glucose and fructose. So again, this is where like having that individualization, like we're talking about, is super important.
Right. And I suppose, so one of the things you're alluding to that I think is important for people to know is that your body has all these, I'm going to totally be crude and like trying to translate science for everybody. It's like you have a big boat and there's only certain types, there's seats for certain types of carbohydrates, and then you kind of fill up the seats, and you want to have, and your body likes to have a mix of seats so that it can go through and support. I don't know. That's pretty. I just came up with my.
I use either the interstate analogy, like there's certain ramps for certain places or things, or a door analogy, like we've got a fructose door and a glucose door,
Right.
And those are going to be individualized in regards to like how many doors you have for each type of sugar, etc.
And so trying things out, and how would you, I guess at the end of the day, and you keep on saying this, at the end of the day, whether it come to an intensity event or it's a longer endurance event. So now we're talking 2.5 up to, however many hours a day, 24 hours. So like people go crazy with these ultra endurance things. So, whether you do one or the other, it is about understanding and having some repetition so you can make small changes and say, okay, well, that worked, but could I make it even better? How was my energy? So how do you work with athletes to say, okay, well, that really worked, but how do we know? Or is it a matter of just keep on playing? Like, yeah, I'm actually performing really well and getting stronger. Well, these things in and of themselves then point to it's working, keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think number one, as the duration of exercise gets longer, the fueling plan may become a little bit more complex. So thinking about, one thing I have my athletes do is actually, and this is a higher level of detail than maybe some people really want to get into, but if you really want to dial in your fueling plan, then you might want to consider doing something like this, like creating an Excel sheet where you actually break down, not like every hour of your race, like not hour 1, I'm going to do this, hour 2, I'm going to do this, because, you might prefer to have something different than what's in that hour. And then you could get all screwed up. So I usually say, like, try to figure out like what could be a good target intake of things for an hour. So hour, essentially you list out the hours, and then you can put in there maybe if you have a hydration or electrolyte mix. I have a column for a gel or food blend option or chew option, and then some food options as well, columns for food options. Now, you don't have to have all of those things in an hour, and you probably don't want to have all of those things in an hour. But then listed down along the side is like your calorie breakdown for that hour, your carbohydrate breakdown, fat, protein, electrolyte breakdown. So then what you can do is you can actually fill it in with the things that you're planning on trialing. So say, just as an example, say you had a hydration mix that you were using and it gave you, 80 calories in one scoop, which you were going to try to consume like that one scoop in an hour. And then it gave you 20 carbohydrates and 300 milligrams of sodium. And then you might also choose to use a sports nutrition product that will give you, 150 calories an hour, and 20 grams of carbs, sodium, etc. And you looked at the products and realized, okay, this has your sugar breakdown looks pretty good. Like there's not too much fructose, not too much glucose there. And then you add everything together and kind of see, like, am I hitting my calorie target, my carb kind of targets, sodium targets, or getting within like a range level for that hour. And so then you can put together your different hours and considering like different options for different hours. Maybe you have a savory option of like mashed potatoes 1 hour or something, and, building in all that kind of stuff. And then my recommendation to test, and this is a long-winded answer to what you're kind of saying,
Yeah.
is that you would actually then maybe test your hydration mix with the gel that you have, or gel chew food blend option one run, and see how that goes. And then if that goes well, then you could do the your food, or your hydration mix option, your gel, and a food option together.
So really what you're really pointing to is a deliberate, really an intentional practice to coming out with solutions for yourself. And what that brings is confidence. At the end of the day.
And organize. So testing in an organized manner. So if you put together this plan and you test everything on the plan in one run, or ride, or whatever you're doing, then that doesn't allow for you to be able to figure out what caused a stomach issue if you have 10 different things that you're using. So you need to keep it. That's why I say, like, at least 2 to 3 months beforehand, you start practicing.
Yeah. Cause you only have so many really
methodically going through. Now, if you have a shorter race that you're doing, maybe you don't need quite as much time, but you still need some time to figure out, you know, am I hitting my fluid targets? Am I hitting my electrolyte targets? Is this gel or food blend going to work for me? You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So can you give us, so where I really want to make sure that the listeners here have some ideas of some whole food options for endurance. So what are some of your athletes' favorite go-tos, so they can start thinking, okay, I now know how deliberate I need to be and intentional. And these are some whole food options that are really working, that like you mentioned mashed potatoes.
Yeah. So mashed potatoes. So with food blends and like mashed potato blends, you can actually buy these reusable flasks that you can put your homemade options in. So those are kind of nice if you want to try out some homemade things. You can also do things like Scratch Labs makes a Rice Krispie treat, or you could make your own like Rice Krispie treats. And those are a really fun option. I would say I was a dietitian for a team for Race Across America. And the cyclists, their preference was literally little boiled potatoes with salt and maybe a little bit of oil or butter on there.
Yeah, that's my athlete too. Yeah, she loves those little nugget potatoes.
Oh yeah. So those are an option. I've definitely had some weird ones. I've had like pierogies, like frozen pierogies, and then you like heat those up and put them in a little baggie. But if you think about it, it is a really good idea.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Little gnocchi as well, like the gnocchi that you can make. You can also find, so a lot of gnocchi, you can get like gluten-free options too. You can always use, for my winter sport athletes, like a lot of mini muffins or like little breads and things, because they don't freeze. So like the thing that you have to consider too with the options that you're choosing is, what is the practicality for the event that I am doing? So like if you're a cyclist, it's going to be different than an OCR athlete compared to a skier, et cetera. So, you got to think about that. You've got to think about the terrain that the race is in, the climate that the race is in, because some foods might not be as appealing in the heat either. So, a lot of things to think about. And when you're so this is where like your race plan or your fueling plan shouldn't remain stagnant. So like if you have something for a target, I don't know, 100-mile running race, it's going to be really hot, et cetera. But then the next race that you're doing is actually in cool temps, really flat. That's totally different conditions. So your fueling needs would theoretically change, and thinking about like, okay, if I make that initial sheet up front, then I can actually like use that as a base and then kind of change it as I, do different races, et cetera.
Yeah. You're going to warm my heart when you said spreadsheet, because my athletes know that they all get spreadsheets. I'm just like, oh my goodness.
It depends on the athletes. Some athletes like really, They're like, really, do I have to break this down to like the calories, et cetera? And I'm like, well, you don't have to, but if you really want to try and like increase your chance of success, then I think it's a good idea. The other point I want to make is no matter what, no matter how much you practice, et cetera, like you're never going to be 100% guaranteed that you won't experience GI distress. I mean, that's just the reality, unfortunately. But what I tell people is if you can set yourself up for the greatest chance of success, why wouldn't you do that? You know?
Yeah. That you have given us so much to think about, and for people to understand I mean, there is a complexity, but I also want to share with people that you start somewhere and start with knowing what's, I think, just to kind of bring it together here, start with knowing what the food is. And for example, if you are curious, if you have GI distress, then looking and Googling, high fructose, and is the thing that you're normally going toward right, now, something that has a high level of fructose, and then understanding that. So first build your awareness, then let's look for some other options. You've given us great options. And the other thing I'm going to tie this in nicely is you are also providing us, all the listeners, with an amazing tool, so that so listeners, go on to the page in which you found this interview, and you can click a button and you can get, maybe you should tell us about it, Kylee, what you're providing everybody with.
Yeah, it's a little recipe book with 5 whole food fueling blends. So you can actually experiment and make at home some options if you want to. It's going to be similar to like your Muir or Spring Energy, but it might be a more cost-effective way to do it. And then I have nutritionally analyzed them. So you have the nutrition facts there too, if you're curious about like the calories, carbohydrates, et cetera. The nice thing to keep in mind too about making at home is you can vary the amount of sodium or electrolyte maybe that you're using in the blend too. So yeah, that's another bonus.
Oh, it's such an awesome bonus. So I have one more question to leave you with, and this is one I'm asking everybody. And the question that I have is, can you remember one moment or in time or an experience that you specifically had that led you to wanting to really dig into this particular area of nutrition? And like why sport nutrition? Was there a moment, or was it just your whole life kind of led you here?
Yeah, I would say actually my whole life led me here. So running has given me so much in my life, and I was determined to marry a career with my passion and be able to kind of give back to a community that I felt like, has given me so much in my life. And I've worked for Ironman North America, putting on triathlon. I've been a race director, a volunteer director, and a coach myself. And so I really wanted to, when I went into nutrition, I was like, I'm doing sports nutrition. It's when you go into your degree program, sports nutrition is not necessarily the focus. It's human nutrition overall. And then you kind of have to drive the specialization a little bit. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I was determined, this is what I'm going to do and start my own business. And so it's just been a really great way to, I feel like it makes me so happy being able to have these conversations as well as work with athletes and see their successes and kind of see the difference that nutrition can make in people's overall health and performance.
Well, I'm so glad that you came on and shared how your process is, what you really did, and shared how it is that you lead athletes to success in taking on the events and the challenges that they want to take on in your life. So thank you so very, very, very much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate being here, and hopefully, I didn't confuse people. I think it's important to remember, like, the main thing I want to stress is we want these little nuggets of like simplification of nutrition information. And, you know, I try to provide some of that to people, but having an understanding that, you know, it's not necessarily just like this 200 to 300 calories an hour, this generalized range. You really, you know, if you really want to hone it in, chatting with, not just trying to like say for myself, but like chatting with a sports dietitian can be a really nice way to just be able to more personalize that to you, because those are just generalizations. And so you need to make sure that everything is going to fit for your lifestyle and your, you know, age, body frame size, etc.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much. Yeah, you really have, you've given us a lot to take from this. So thank you so much. And yeah, take care, everybody.
Thank
And on to the
you.
next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.